coming and visiting with us today. I think the one thing that we hear time and again, regardless of if you're a large community or small community, is the need for appropriate housing. And in many cases, it can take a different form or a different priority regardless, depending upon whether you're in a small community or a large community. But at the federal level, we need to be able to look at multiple types of programs that might be available to assist in incentivizing the development of new housing. Housing eventually wears out, and you've got to be looking towards the future. I'd like to begin with Ms. Willis. First of all, thank you for the work to help the people with the lowest incomes have the opportunity for quality and affordable homes in our communities. The last several years, I've focused on bipartisan housing work addressing a range of topics, including the streamlining of the environmental review process, modifying homelessness prevention programs, and increase access to affordable housing in rural areas. For the past two Congresses, Senator Smith and I have introduced the Rural Housing Service Reform Act to preserve affordable housing units in rural communities across the country and make much-needed updates to the USDA's Rural Housing Service. My question for you is that with your work with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, how could legislation like the Rural Housing Service Reform Act make a difference in rural communities and their ability to finance affordable housing?
Thank you for the question, Senator. It is extremely important to ensure that we have affordable housing in rural communities. We talked a bit today about suburban and urban communities and tribal communities as well, but it is important to make sure that we focus on urban communities. We know that some of the challenges that are faced in rural communities are severe in terms of the building of affordable housing. Sometimes it's much harder to build in rural communities. Sometimes the wages are for the people in rural communities are lower. And what we have is really, when we talk about an affordable housing crisis, in nationwide, 1 out of 4 people who are eligible for affordable housing get affordable housing or rental assistance of some kind. Another way of saying that is 3 out of 4 don't. And so I think in terms of if we're looking at the demand side, really it's making sure that the federal government invests and have resources for communities, including rural communities, to make sure that they also have that the housing, that it's deeply targeted. And so if we're talking about building affordable housing, we're talking about ensuring that if a builder is building in a rural community, that they're using USDA funds or they're using low-income housing tax credits, but maybe even pairing that with home dollars or with the housing trust fund dollars.
I think some rural housing, it's different in some cases than some of the urban housing challenges, but once again, you have fewer contractors, and the contractors that are there may build fewer homes as well in those rural areas. Just curious, excuse me, who are going to be the individuals hit hardest by the expiring USDA mortgages, and what could that mean for available workforce housing? I mean, it sounds like a weird offset, but literally, as these mortgages expire, things happen to those programs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, they do. And so what's happening is that as the USDA mortgages are expiring, also a lot of times they're paired with subsidies. So we want to make sure that the families and individuals who are living in the homes or where the mortgages are expiring, that they can continue to use those subsidies. So it's really kind of decoupling.
That needs to be done.
That's right, absolutely, to ensure that people can stay housed because it's important. These are mortgages after 20, 30 years where we want to be able to keep them in the housing stock because if not, landlords can raise the rents, can take them out of the stock, can do all sorts of things, right?
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Dr. Glaeser, just a real quick thought. CDBGs are really important, and we use that in a lot of cases to determine infrastructure opportunities in small and rural communities. One challenge, though, is that in order to do a lot of those types of things, you've got to be able to identify the environmental review processes, but also the Davis-Bacon prevailing wage requirements. If I remember correctly, utilizing a $2,000 CDBG in a local community and a project that would require following Davis-Bacon requirements. That includes prevailing wage compliance, weekly certified payroll reporting, on-site labor interviews, contractor documentation, and administrative oversight. I guess my question very quickly is wouldn't it cost more than $2,000 in administrative costs just to complete the Davis-Bacon reporting alone? You want, yeah.
That certainly sounds like a lot of work, Senator. And I think while most of the regulations that we're talking about are local, I am certainly on board for a reducing the federal regulatory burden as well agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.